Welcome to the Peak Performance and Peak Satisfaction podcast with Master Executive Coach Sherry Gregoff. Sherry helps business people perform better, get rewarded handsomely, and actually enjoy their work. After having her own career turnaround, she now helps other high-powered business professionals experience the same. Join the movement to work differently.
Welcome to the podcast. It is great to have you here. Today, we are talking about rest, the ultimate power flex. Rest is not often considered as a factor while aiming for peak performance and peak satisfaction in our careers. But it's the ultimate power flex and an important prerequisite. What high-powered executive do you know that is available 24/7 with a wide open door? The most valuable players in the office know that staying at the top of their game means taking proper breaks too. Learn how to use rest to help your career and your overall satisfaction. If it's been a while since you truly embraced pure rest, this episode is for you. Before we jump in, I want to shout out one of my clients who had a win in this area. Here's the quote from her. "I know I should be enjoying this time of less workload and using it to establish self-care habits, but I experience guilt. There's not more that I can be doing at work. So I feel chained to my desk and my mind swirls with worry and negativity instead." This client was in the unique situation of her function being largely on hold during a redesign of the organization. After doing everything she could in the few remaining projects, having career conversations where she clearly articulated her career vision, she received positive feedback and was assured the lull would pass and there was nothing more to do but wait. What I find fascinating about this very specific example was that even then, she felt incredible guilt stepping away from her computer. Time at the gym, a walk for fresh air, time with her partner, or reading seemed like a dream that was out of reach. In the end, it was recognizing that with no work to engage with, the time at her desk was spent in worry and lamenting the uncertainty of the situation, plugging into the panic of colleagues, and jockeying for whatever bit of spotlight remained to be allocated in the office. The toll was measurable, and she was not showing up her best at work. This ironic result from being wholly dedicated to being accessible without fail was actually impairing her performance. She was there all right, but knew she was not at the top of her game. Coaching allowed her to see the way out of this conundrum, giving herself permission to take real breaks, to rest and recharge, would allow her to come back to work refreshed and more creative. And wonderfully, it cut her regrets about her current lack of boundaries and negative soundtrack of inner talk. Similar victories are shared by all of my clients, and I have experienced it too in my own career turnaround. So let's hop to today's podcast content and get you on your way to experiencing this also. I would like to start off today's discussion on rest with some evidence to give yourself permission to rest and to take a break from work. I touched on this in the introduction to today's episode, but let's consider this more deeply. Are the most successful business people available 24/7 with an open door? Or is their time so valuable that people will wait to get on their calendar? Others are not surprised that they are not readily accessible, because it is assumed that their time is precious and being spent on something important. So if one of the reasons why taking breaks from your work to rest is that you believe you are so important, or that the work simply cannot wait, think again. It's easy to believe that a 30-minute break in the middle of your jam-packed work schedule is impossible, but that is just a notion. People-pleasing may be tempting, but again, the MVPs at work aren't aiming to make everyone happy who would like their time today. We might also fear a dip in our output, by reallocating time away from the work at hand. In fact, it's proven that breaks make us more productive and effective, so we waste less time and we create higher quality work product. Logically, taking breaks to rest makes sense, and we see evidence that super successful business professionals do it. For my rational thinkers tuning in today, I've got you covered. Let's turn to my business people who lead more with empathy. Sometimes the logical case is not enough to internalize and implement. I see you, my friends, and I am right there with you. Allow me to make my case for rest another way. When I think back to when I first started becoming truly aware of what little priority I placed on rest, I realized that 3 colleagues' experiences inspired me to do a full self-assessment on what needed to change in terms of my free time and work. You can imagine, at the end of our illustrious careers, we will reflect on the decades of service that we have given. We may see things more clearly and may even have regrets. I will share experiences of colleagues who, when wrapping up their stellar careers, were given feedback that made me snap to attention on rest. First was a retiree who, when informing her elderly parents of her upcoming retirement, they cried and sobbed. They explained that they felt they had been watching her work to the bone and compromise her health for her work for decades, and were terrified that she would die of a heart attack on the job because her stress was so high. They cried with relief that she would no longer have this cause of stress that they watched wear on her so heavily. I imagine the fear my loved ones had about my own level of stress and emotional ownership in my work. Feeling like I was thrusting that worry on people who cared about me deeply was an eye-opener. Was their fear always justified? It's debatable, and yet I recognized, when looking through their lens, just how far the pendulum had swung in my own life-work balance, to know that it was time for some changes to care for myself better and avoid disastrous declines in my health. I forgot that warning about putting on your own oxygen mask first, and was definitely putting health last. The number of health issues I witness in business professionals is staggering. It's time to care for this precious one life that we have. Let's talk about another retiree who, at her celebratory toast, had a longtime colleague and friend publicly thank her for consistently putting her work family ahead of her family at home. The sentiment was with good intention and truly to thank her for the personal sacrifices she made and the impeccable care she showed for the business, her colleagues, and clients. But I knew how that statement was received, and I imagined how she felt about her divorce and now empty nest at home, wondering how much she would do differently with this hindsight. If you have a spouse, you know how easily we can take that relationship for granted, how easy it is to assume our partners agree to sacrifice time with us to enable our success. Or maybe you don't have a partner and feel that it was a part of life that you never got around to prioritizing. If you are a parent, you might be slinging diapers and juggling daycare, or navigating the bigger problems that come with bigger kids. Either way, that season is so short compared to a career. It can be tempting to think about it as a chapter that you have to get through, or wish it just wasn't so hard. Even dream of how much simpler it might feel to only focus on work. In all cases, we can lose sight that, of course, our personal relationships are more important than our jobs. But day to day, it's easy to have that backwards. It adds up, and at the end of our careers, we want to have had first things first. Let's talk about the final experience of a retiree who, once he announced his retirement, went on a family trip with siblings and extended family. During what felt like a milestone return to the country of their heritage, his family members remarked that while they had gotten together, including on trips throughout the years, this was the first time he was truly present and engaged since he started his long and highly successful career. They were so grateful to have him back without the pressure, stress, and constant plugging in to work. As he relayed this story to me, I saw the surprise on his face and the regret, but also the resolve to live fully and stay present and engaged now. In each one of these stories, I will forever remember their faces. The look of the first woman as she tearfully described her parents sobbing with relief at the news of her retirement and the end of the worry that had rattled them through their golden years. The forced composure of the second woman as she was thanked for putting work ahead of her family for decades and graciously let it roll off her back while her shoulders shrank a little lower. And the cautionary tone of the man who relayed the feedback from his family, who felt like they had a shell of him throughout his career and were grateful for his genuine presence and attention once more. These three people are brilliant and multidimensional. Their success is one of dreams. Their families are stunning and beloved. And yet, even they fall prey to the notion of rest and breaks not on the agenda. We discussed 3 retirees' experiences, but let's consider when a career is ended involuntarily. This adds insult to injury in that the career or job is not ended on the individual's terms, but to then also realize that one's health, marriage, children, and attention had been devoted to an employer who decided to terminate the employment relationship. That is a real tragedy. If you haven't experienced it, let this be a wake-up call, a friendly reminder that employment at will should always be prioritized lower than health and relationships that are for life. Let me say that again. Employment at will should always be prioritized lower than health and relationships that are for life. Don't hold too tightly to the temporary and miss what is meant to be eternal. I hope that both the facts and logical case, but also the emotional appeal of the case for rest, has compelled you to prioritize this now in your work and life. Unfortunately, I find that even with an earnest interest to incorporate rest, it can prove challenging for most business professionals. Let's take this step by step today to clear the path for making rest your power flex. First, let's unravel the notion of always being on. Prior to COVID-19, it was customary that only certain roles would require being available and accessible at all times. Quarantine made us think open access was standard. Guilt for being at home every workday, being a bit bored with our usual hobbies and outings having been ripped away from us, other than making sourdough bread, that is, we started doing work or responding to work messages all the time. I knew people who would roll out of bed to their desk and work until they went back to bed. Our lives may have revolved around work for a period. In fact, we may have welcomed it as a distraction, as something to do, as a way to feel productive, or to assert control during a time when everything was halted. Boundaries were blown up as home and the office became one in a very abrupt way. Work and life merged too. It was almost a default approach. We would joke about it to try to make light of what were some very devastating times. Fast forward to now, and we may have never really given up feeling an obligation to be highly accessible at all times. We may have never put healthy boundaries back in place. We got very greedy with taking other people's time as well, because there was nothing else to do. When we critically evaluate this idea of being 100% available, though it also indicates that whatever else you have going on can wait. So whatever request or fire drill that arises is always more important and more valuable than your other alternatives. The only time this is truly even possible is either when you are in low demand with light workload, or when you are willing to drop everything to people please the person asking in the moment. Otherwise, you would be unavailable. We presume that others conclude that we don't care when we are unavailable, when really it may just be an indicator of being in high demand. So step 1 is deciding that always being on for work is not your best strategy for success, nor is it your best strategy for satisfaction. The notion to hold on to when saying no and honoring boundaries is that you are so valuable that you can't be available to all people for all requests at all times. You prioritize. In fact, you are the asset, and being the most valuable asset in your career requires maintenance and investment. One aspect of that is rest. So if your mind is right on rest and you want to pursue it as part of your maintenance of your best asset, as an ingredient to your peak performance, and as a crucial part of peak satisfaction in your professional career, let's cover the next steps to actively do it. Now that we shifted our perspective on rest, let's actually rediscover what you find to be fun. I am defining rest for us today as time spent intentionally not working, but rather doing an activity that cares for our well-being and fills our cup. With that definition, consider what comes to mind as a worthy activity. To evaluate the worthiness, ask yourself how you feel during and after the activity. As an example, if you like to scroll on social as a restful activity, I would challenge that. While doing the activity, you likely feel distracted, maybe a bit numb, and you're getting the small hits of dopamine. Afterwards, you may feel deflated at how others seem to be doing better than you, or stressed because now you feel more pressed for time with less energy to face the tasks ahead. So no, that doesn't qualify as rest. In contrast, let's consider a walk outside. During it, you might feel relief, recharged, inspired, maybe a creative idea strikes. Afterwards, you might feel endorphins, feel glad that you cared for yourself, and experience more energy to do your next tasks. Let's put a couple more examples through our evaluation criteria. How about a lunch with a colleague? This is a bit of a trick question. Depending on the party, it may go like this. Lunch spent gossiping, venting, and complaining about work. During the conversation, you may feel seen and heard, and the stress normalized. But afterwards, you may feel heavier, more hopeless, and less energy to face the tasks ahead. How about time with a loved one, even doing nothing, with enough space to really notice them and really listen without a deadline overhead or a worry keeping you distracted? During that activity, you feel present and connected. Afterward, you feel content that you invested time in that person and re-energized to face the tasks of the day. So what does rest look like for you? How about fun that recharges you, that fills you up both during and after the activity? This is what is on the agenda for your protected time for rest. Next up, we need to schedule this rest. With our newly proven strategy to not be working or accessible for work at all times, we have the freedom to schedule our rest first. I will give you some personal examples to get you started. I sleep from 10 to 6, screens off, in bed, resting or sleeping. I take a break to walk outside in the middle of my workday. I eat breakfast and dinner with my family every day. Every day. I take care of my health before I do anything else in the morning. These are times to rest and recharge. I schedule it in my calendar. I follow alarms until I don't need them anymore. I enjoy the activity, and I feel better for doing it immediately. It makes me more effective in my work as a business professional. It makes me a better wife, mom, and friend. It makes me a better human. So even when I am tempted to people please or push through a break to finish a task, I remind myself that the most successful people prioritize and honor boundaries. The most successful people recognize themselves as the asset that they are the steward of. The most successful performers, athletes, and business people know the value of rest and how it helps both their performance and their satisfaction. So they don't quit. They don't compromise. They don't capitulate. They are empowered to rest. They don't need permission. They assert their own power to make it a priority. This is what makes it the true power flex. Not because of the perception by others of being in demand or a VIP, but because they know how to make the most of work and life. Rest is what makes that possible. They don't take fake breaks, scrolling, shopping, drinking, gossiping, venting, binge watching, drowning in media. That adds to the stress, sucks their time, and depletes their energy. They rest with purpose and intention, carefully designed and consistently scheduled to stay in peak form. They is we, my friends. We are just one power flex, one new habit of rest away from excellence with more ease. Which habit will you make your own starting now? How will you encourage a colleague or friend in their bold habit of rest? How will you support a team member in doing the same? Lean on the logical argument and the emotional one as needed. A final thought for today. Not making rest a priority can have you missing the forest through the trees in two ways. One, if your work is so important or so busy that you believe you can't rest, remember that the quality of your work will be better if you rest. Second, if you don't prioritize rest and you find that your satisfaction professionally and or personally isn't as high as where you want it to be, I would offer up that rest may be the very first thing that you incorporate and watch the improvement in your happiness at work and at home. Have fun resting, friends. Until next time.
Looking for support in applying the principles and strategies in today's episode? Sherry coaches clients one-on-one as their trusted confidant and advisor, helping each client create the work and life they had only dreamed of. To schedule your complimentary career strategy session, go to sherrygregoff.com/apply to book time with her today. It's one simple step that can change everything.